Global Sumud Flotilla. Roots of Sumud. To understand the global Sumud Flotilla, we must first understand the roots of Sumud itself. Sumud is not just a word, it is a philosophy, a way of life, and for Palestinians, it is the very heartbeat of survival. The term emerged after the Nakba of 1948, when more than 700,000 Palestinians were forced from their homes, their villages destroyed, their lands seized. In that moment of immense displacement and trauma, a choice stood before the people: to surrender to despair or to hold on, to endure, to remain rooted. They chose Sumud, steadfastness. They chose to stay on their land when they could, and when they were forced into exile, they carried the memory of that land in their hearts, passing it down through generations. Sumud has many faces. It is the farmer who plants olive trees even after settlers burn his groves. It is the mother who insists her children walk to school despite checkpoints and harassment. It is the student who studies by candlelight during blackouts, refusing to let the siege extinguish the light of knowledge. It is the family who rebuilds their demolished home for the 5th time, stone by stone, as an act of defiance against erasure. Throughout decades of occupation, Sumud became a shield and a weapon. It was not armed resistance, but it was resistance nonetheless. The refusal to leave, the refusal to surrender dignity, the refusal to vanish. International law could not protect Palestinians. Global powers turned their backs. But through Sumud, they protected themselves. They clung to their identity, their language, their traditions, their history, and their future. When we speak of Sumud, we speak of ordinary lives lived under extraordinary pressures. We speak of women carrying water from wells because infrastructure has been destroyed. We speak of men waiting hours at checkpoints just to reach their jobs. We speak of children who play amid rubble, imagining a tomorrow where they can live free. Sumud is not dramatic or loud. It is quiet, persistent, unyielding. It is survival as defiance. This spirit of steadfastness traveled beyond borders. Refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan carried the same message: we are still here. In every generation, Sumud was reborn, teaching the world that even under siege, even in exile, even in silence, resistance continues. It was this principle, this undying steadfastness, that inspired people around the world to join the struggle and eventually to set sail together in the global Sumud Flotilla. The sea as a border and a bridge. For most nations, the sea is a promise of freedom. It is the road to trade, to travel, to adventure, to contact with the wider world. But for Gaza, the sea has become something else, a border that both connects and confines. It is a reminder of freedom denied, and yet also a symbol of the freedom that remains possible. Stretching along 40 kilometers of Mediterranean coast, Gaza's shoreline should have been a gift, a source of livelihood, tourism, and economic growth. Instead, it has been turned into a barrier. Since the blockade began in 2007, fishing zones have been restricted to just a few nautical miles. Fishermen risk arrest, their boats confiscated, even live fire, simply for crossing invisible lines in the water. What should be a daily act of survival, casting a net into the sea, has become an act of danger. Families that once lived by fishing are pushed into poverty. Young people who dream of sailing out to the world find themselves trapped by gunboats on the horizon. Yet the sea refuses to be only a prison. It is also a reminder that the blockade cannot erase geography. Gaza still touches the Mediterranean, still faces Europe, Africa, and Asia. Every wave that breaks on its shore whispers of connection.
It is this tension, prison, and possibility that makes the sea so central to the Palestinian struggle. It was no accident that activists around the world chose the sea as their path of solidarity. The first free Gaza boats set sail in 2008, small and fragile compared to the warships that patrolled the coast. Yet when they arrived, breaking the siege for the first time, they carried not just medicine and supplies, but a message. Gaza is not alone. The blockade can be challenged. Humanity can cross the waters where politics builds walls. The most famous of these efforts came in 2010 with the Mavi Marmara Flotilla. Hundreds of activists from dozens of countries sailed together, determined to reach Gaza with aid and solidarity. Their journey ended in violence, as commandos stormed the ship, killing and injuring passengers. The tragedy shocked the world, but it also revealed the power of the flotilla movement. Ordinary citizens, unarmed and peaceful, had confronted one of the most powerful militaries on earth. They showed that the sea could still be a bridge, even if crossing it demanded sacrifice. Since then, flotillas have continued to set sail, each one carrying the spirit of resistance. Some never reached Gaza, some were intercepted, but each voyage sent a message far beyond the waves. The blockade is not normal, and the world will not remain silent. The image of small civilian boats facing military warships became a powerful metaphor. The strength of justice against the machinery of oppression, the fragility of wooden decks against steel, and yet the resilience of humanity refusing to surrender. The global Sumud Flotilla inherits this history. It builds upon every attempt, every sail hoisted, every message carried across the sea. It declares that the sea will not belong only to those who patrol it with weapons, but also to those who cross it with solidarity. In the hands of the people, the sea becomes not a prison, but a bridge of conscience between Gaza and the world, between steadfastness and freedom, between isolation and unity. Birth of the global Sumud Flotilla. Every movement has a moment when hope takes shape, when ideas that seem impossible begin to transform into action. The global Sumud Flotilla was born from such a moment, a recognition that steadfastness must not remain confined to the borders of Palestine, but must sail across the world, binding people together in a common struggle for dignity and freedom. The idea was simple yet daring. If Palestinians cannot freely sail the seas that touch their shores, then the world will sail for them. Not governments, not armies, but ordinary people, farmers, teachers, students, cultural workers, faith leaders, and activists, all united by one principle: steadfastness. This was not to be a flotilla of warships, but of solidarity. Boats would carry the message of Sumud across oceans and harbors, from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean. The voyage itself would become a living symbol, a chain of resistance spanning continents. The birth of the flotilla was shaped by decades of smaller, courageous efforts. The Free Gaza movement had shown what was possible. The Mavi Marmara tragedy had shown the risks. But each attempt also showed that the world was watching, that people far from Gaza were ready to risk their safety for justice. Building on these lessons, activists envisioned something broader, something even more global. Not just a single ship or a single crossing, but a movement that could ripple outward, inspiring communities everywhere to declare their solidarity. In its earliest stages, the global Sumud Flotilla was nothing more than scattered conversations. Late-night calls between activists on different continents, quiet meetings in refugee camps, solidarity gatherings in community centers and universities. But those conversations carried power. They asked the same questions again and again. How do we make the world see what Gaza is enduring? How do we remind people that steadfastness is not isolation, but connection? How do we turn the sea from a symbol of blockade into a pathway of freedom? Gradually, those conversations turned into plans. Local committees formed in cities from Cape Town to Kuala Lumpur, from Dublin to Santiago, from Istanbul to New York. Each group brought its own energy, its own resources, its own stories. South Africa